black, he's right, or that he has any right to office or position based upon his color. But I do feel very strongly about the fact that great men have been disenfranchised for a long time and have not been able to sit in high places politically or on other levels because of color. But this has had great psychological ramifications, not only for the Negro community, who has had many reversals over the last couple of years, because the racism which permeates American life from top to bottom in very subtle ways and in very aggressive, obvious ways, uh, uh, the Negro has paid a terrible price for this. But somehow you'll find that racism, in its subtlest and its most evil sense, has worked its way deep into the fiber of the hearts and minds of many men and women. And with this going on, it has had its incredible influence on my own life. I was born in the ghetto. My mother was a domestic worker. My father was a seaman. I grew up in Harlem. I grew up not only with racism and segregation in America, but I grew up in the West Indies under colonialism. And my aunts and uncles and my grandparents were agriculturalists. They were farmers. And I saw what they did from morning until night and what their rewards were under the might of British exploitation. Yet I've come into my own manhood, and I have sought to apply myself to this world. I have children. I have high hopes for them. I fought in the Second World War. I was in the United States Navy. I was told then, and I fought with the knowledge that this was the war to end all wars, that we were going to defeat fascism and mankind could turn its attention to the best that was in man. And now I come, and my son is 10 years old, and I will arm him with everything that I can so that he will be free of any primitive, medieval, concepts about false patriotism, about boundaries, about the meaning of flags. Mankind is much bigger than all of these primitive symbols. And I don't want to see my boy with his face stuck in some rice paddy off in Vietnam or off in some other land, protecting the interests of the establishment and trying to reward their greed with his life. I'm opposed to it. And I don't want him to be armed with a sense of being able to go off and destroy another human being anywhere in the world whom he's never known. It's inhuman. It's terrible. And the reason I hang around is to make sure that in my old age, if I live to see it, that I will be able to say that in my lifetime I did all that I could with what was at my disposal, because I would hate for my children to look at me and to say, where were you during the moment of the great...
Good morning and welcome to the National Newspaper Publishers Association's Let It Be Known. This morning, we remember Harry Belafonte, the singer, actor, and activist who became an indispensable supporter of the civil rights movement. Harry Belafonte died yesterday at the age of 96. His publicist said the cause was congestive heart failure. Belafonte was dubbed the King of Calypso after the groundbreaking success of his 1956 hit, The Banana Boat Song. He also became a movie star after acting in the film adaptation of the Broadway musical Carmen Jones. But Belafonte's biggest contributions took place off stage. He was a key strategist, fundraiser, and mediator for the civil rights movement. He continually risked his entertainment career and at least once his life for his activism. He became a close friend of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who often retired to Belafonte's palatial New York apartment to talk strategy or escape the pressures of leading the civil rights movement. Of a real leader, a reader as well, with a burning disdain for injustice, Harry Belafonte and his political consciousness was shaped by the experience of growing up as the impoverished son of a poor Jamaican mother who worked as a domestic servant. This morning, Let It Be Known discusses the amazing life of Harry Belafonte. Joining us is Barrington Salmon, fellow Jamaican, Barrington Salmon, and of course, Sam P.K. Collins. Good morning, guys.
Morning.
You know, Harry Belafonte, one quote I think about he says, I was an activist who became an artist. I was not an artist who became an activist. We'll start with you, Barrington. That's your proud countryman. Uh, he really, truly lived up to that, didn't he?
Yeah, I'm a proud countryman, but he was really a citizen of the world because his work encompassed opposition to imperialism and colonialism, American and British and whatever else. And he was a UN ambassador, UNICEF ambassador. I traveled widely, spreading his message. Um, I remember going to when Nelson Mandela came to the United States the first time. We went to Atlanta to see him, and Reverend Joseph Lowry introduced Mandela as a quintessence of African manhood. And in my mind, Harry Belafonte is the epitome of the quintessence of African manhood. I love the fact that he was so unapologetic. I mean, I was talking to a friend of mine who knew Mr. B really well, and we were talking about different things that had happened, and I was remembered that at one point he went in on Barack Obama,
Mm-hmm.
saying what a disappointment he was that he was just basically he had basically become an instrument of U.S. imperialism. And I think it was around sanctions that the United States imposed against Venezuela, and a lot of folks were upset because President Obama is like the symbol of Black progress in the United States, and they were some of them were miffed that he did that, but he didn't care because his cause was freedom and his cause was justice.
Yeah, Sam, one of the, I mean, the tributes are just amazing that have been pouring in. But one of the things that stood out to me, one of the tributes, Bernice King, of course, the daughter of Martin and Coretta Scott King, posted a photo that I don't know that I saw this photo before. The funeral of Martin Luther King, uh, Harry Belafonte is seated with Coretta Scott King, and the anguish on her face, but then the tears in Harry Belafonte's eyes. These were sometimes performative, right? There was nothing performative about these tears. He was very, very close, not only to King, but he was instrumental. When you see the word instrumental here in the civil rights movement, he helped fund it. He marched. He did everything in front of the cameras and behind the cameras. Sam.
And that's why I like using the word organizer more than activist. From my vantage point, the word activist has been watered down and commodified to the point where anybody can become an instrument of the powers that be through that word. But Harry Belafonte was the true epitome of an organizer, and what he was able to contribute financially, strategically, and everything else in terms of the civil rights movement, and just in terms of how he was able to internationalize the fight for human rights and call to task anybody, regardless of color or creed, for what part they played in perpetuating injustice. And in terms of his organizing, just financially, because money does run the world, he was able to leverage his popularity. He was able to use what funds he had from his craft in order to, first of all, support the man who was the face of the movement, because as organizers, if you're not eating, if you're always worried about money, that takes you away from the work. Being able to, meet that reality with such grace was very powerful on his end. And I think that, more contemporary actors and personalities should take an example out of that.
Yeah, and sometimes, a lot of times, perhaps, we get caught up in our own struggle, our own fight, and not realizing that it's a global fight. And I say that because Harry Belafonte saw the civil rights movement not just as an American thing, but he took that globally. And we know that, right? Because with that, he also, long before it became so popular to do, he led the campaign against apartheid in South Africa. And he befriended Nelson Mandela. Barrington alluded to Mandela earlier. He also mobilized and supported the fight for HIV and AIDS globally, Barrington.
Yeah, I just, if you don't mind, I'd like to add something to what Sam said.
Mhm.
What we need to remember is that Harry Belafonte helped fund SNCC, Southern Christian Leadership Conference. They said he helped pay Martin Luther King's mortgage. He helped pay for the children to go to school.
Also, in addition to that, anytime the civil rights leaders, they would get locked up a lot. Well,
Yeah,
he
he
was
paid
bailing them
bail.
out.
But the sad thing that I found out yesterday was that when Coretta Scott King died, George Bush said that he would not come if Harry Belafonte was there. And they disinvited Mr. B, which to me is shameful, given all that he had done for the family. Because when Martin Luther King died, they said he had $300
Mm-hmm.
because he had devoted his entire wealth, if you want to call it that, finances, to the struggle, to the civil rights struggle. So one of the things that I was reading Charles Blow's column about a speech that Mr. B made in 2013, and he lamented the fact that blacks in this country began chasing after the big jobs, the opportunities, and they were seduced by the money and the inducements that this country always dangles in front of those who are seeking their freedom. And so that is something that I think that we always need to be mindful of. What was you see, I'm off on a tangent now. What was the question that you would, what was the statement you had made before I
His
stopped?
global he took the fight globally
Oh yeah,
for civil rights, and of course, he long before it was in the mainstream, as it were, he was fighting against apartheid.
but you remember, remember too, he said Paul Robeson was his mentor,
Hmm.
and Paul Robeson had always articulated Black freedom in global terms. He was very instrumental in the anti-apartheid movement. And I mean, it's interesting because he could have easily just said, "Here's some money," and sat
Right.
back, but he was out front, in front of the South African embassy, as Sam said, organizing and helping in ways that he didn't have to. He could have just sat on his laurels as an artist, as a singer, and just allowed others to take the reins. But he was always very, very involved, and to me,
You,
that's just fabulous.
you
If
know,
if I may,
go ahead, go ahead.
real quick, to Barrington's point, and I had just found that out yesterday as well in reading about Harry Belafonte, about what happened during Coretta Scott King's funeral. And I think that speaks to the watering down of the civil rights generation and what they traded for access to power. And it makes you think about what exactly is power as we define it. Is power access? And if power is access, then why is it that Black people as a collective are still in the same situation that they found themselves in half a century or so ago? And I often talk to my students about this. Even as nationalistic as I am, I understand that the movement has moved from a race-based one to a class-based one, in the sense that within our Black family, there are people who will step over us to get to the top and hoard power for themselves. So it was very shameful what happened to Mr. Belafonte in that moment. But I think, I don't think he would have cared as deeply. I think that, given his age, he knew the consequences of standing up to power. And George Bush was the war president of my generation. I was in the 7th grade when 9/11 happened. I went to middle school and high school all throughout the Iraq offensive. So I've seen what happened. That's when we became conscious, in our global consciousness. So, seeing him stand up was just very powerful in that sense. And he knew the consequences. So I think that was an honor in itself, and now he gets to reunite with Coretta Scott King. and several others. So I'll leave it at that. That's all I gotta say.
Perhaps the
And
most
some of the
distracting and
here,
perhaps
here
the
we
most
go.
important wreckage to take a look at is really the wreckage of the Democratic Party.
Get him to the stage.
I've been a Democrat all my life. I have no treaty with the Republicans, nor do I really seek one. But the Democratic Party was not always our friend. As a matter of fact, a lot of what we had to struggle against was in the possession and the power of Democrats who came from the South. And when we showed them the tenaciousness and the conviction and the sense of great purpose that the people of this nation had into transforming our condition, all those Democrats from the South ran off and became Republicans as an act of punishment for what we were trying to achieve as a people. And that punishment continues to play itself out.
Yeah. Sam, I'll throw that one to you. That was, and Hillary Clinton sitting right there, and others in the audience. That was pretty powerful.
And I really respect Harry Belafonte for what, in terms of engaging Cuba and Venezuela, and what he said to Hugo Chavez. That was powerful in itself. Anytime that you're able to go beyond domestic policy and confer with the so-called enemies of the state, that's when you become even more of a dangerous man. And the fact that he was able to die of natural causes is an honor all within itself, and it speaks to the juice that he had. So, being disinvited from certain events, that in the grand scheme of things was the least of his worries, because he had comrades, people who he organized with who suffered much greater loss. And the Democratic Party has some things to do. I know President Biden announced his re-election yesterday, and I'm on Twitter. I'm talking to people. Some people are disappointed in a sense, but others are saying, well, what alternatives do we have? And they're calling on young people to give alternatives. But there is so much power being concentrated between the two parties. And, if the Republicans are the overt racists, then the Democrats are the ones who have a sea of priorities that Black people get lost up in. So it's like, where do you go? And I think that the only strategy is, a local, statewide strategy. And I'm going off on a tangent here, but the point that I'm making is that pretty much we got to embody that spirit of not just being activists or organizers just for the cameras. We can't be afraid to call people to task and to organize outside of whatever system they set up for us.
So Barrington, is there a Harry Belafonte today?
I think that there are lots of Harry Belafontes. Captain Thomas Sankara, the assassinated president of Burkina Faso, said that there's 7 million Sankaras, because activists like Sankara and Patrice Lumumba and Mr. B, they plant the seeds of rebellion. That's why they're so dangerous. So, because, I talk to folks all the time. I am fortunate to interview a lot of folks, or just talk to a lot of folks of Sam's generation, and they are more uncompromising, have a clearer vision, and they don't give a damn. And that's what scares our contemporaries and the government. So don't think. I mean, I talked to some Black Lives Matter leaders. I talked to Rashad Robinson from Color of Change. Anybody who has been presented as a leader, a young Black leader, is being surveilled by the FBI, by local law enforcement, and that type of thing. So nothing's changed. J. Edgar Hoover, may he burn in hell, has been dead since 1972, but his instrument still continues to oppress Black people. So there are I have seen lots of potential Mr. B's, and that heartens me, because a lot of our generation, Stacy, were like, we don't know, these young people ain't shit, these young people da 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 da. But you have a lot of young people who are working hard, and if they are able to avoid the seduction, they can effect real change.
Well, Austin writes in that the two from Tennessee are examples of today's Harry Belafonte.
Yes, the two Justins. Yeah, Justin Pearson and Justin Jones. Yeah.
And so Harry Belafonte risked it all. He literally risked it all. And this is another part of what we're talking about, though, right? Are there Harry Belafonte, those willing to risk it all? He put everything on the line and didn't think twice about it.
But Stacey, you have to remember, a lot of what we're dealing with when it comes to the political elite, the wealthy, the political elite, they don't have to be as overt as they were in the past.
Mm-hmm.
They have killed enough of us so that they've instilled the fear. That's what the plantation owners used to do. Take the most rebellious enslaved person and make them an example. Peter Tosh always said, everybody wants to see Jesus, but nobody wants to die. So we want to reach the promised land, but we want to do as little work as possible, and we sure as hell don't want to get killed. But what I think is important is that I am seeing young people who are disregarding the dangers to themselves as they pursue freedom for themselves and for Black people.
So, Sam, take us give us a little more insight into Harry Belafonte, if you can. The man, we know, again, he was a great entertainer, but more than that, as we've been discussing, he was an organizer, an activist, if you will, but certainly, like you said, an organizer. What drove Harry Belafonte? What do you believe drove him more than anything else?
The truth. I think the truth, and just like the clip said, being accountable to his children and knowing that his legacy was much more important than whatever trinkets were thrown in front of him. And Harry Belafonte, as he grew older in age, was always at the forefront and always able to hold people accountable. The most recent occasions of which come to mind for me was how he attempted to take Jay-Z to task. And, Jay-Z said something, a tongue-in-cheek statement that I'm not going to entertain on the air, but just Harry Belafonte's ability to hold people accountable and to raise the lever in terms of what being an organizer and what being a person of influence entails. A point that was brought up earlier about if there are Harry Belafontes today, there definitely are Harry Belafontes, and the insidiousness of the system is that they've created systems that co-opt naturally grassroots movements. So whereas in Harry Belafonte's generation, a lot of what we seen him do was organic and outside of the realms of the system, these days, the State Department, the president, anybody from, the international and national bodies, they host conventions and they pump federal dollars into initiatives that were initially intended to be grassroots. Because how do you fight the system with backing from the government? And I saw that at the U.S. Africa Summit, the way that the Biden administration was able to engage well-meaning Harry Belafontes, into doing the bidding of the American empire. And we saw it when Kamala Harris visited the continent, because they didn't visit the continent out of regard for Africa's well-being. This is part of an ongoing proxy war that they are involved in with China and with Russia. So, to answer your question about Harry Belafonte's legacy, it is about being relentless in their assessment and their criticism of the American empire and not really caring about what that does to them, because talent overrides all. I know as a journalist that, whatever you say, if it's rooted in truth, and if you are as talented and as professional and as useful as possible, then your job and your well-being is always intact. Because even if they fire you and they cut you, the Most High and the universe and the ancestors will always have your back. And it seems to me that Mr. Belafonte always had that air about him, that his talent and that his relentlessness was always going to take him to the next level. And a lot of actors and actresses do not have that these days, because everything has been institutionalized. This whole PR machine, everybody got to, watch what they say. Everybody got to get comments filtered. You got to talk to the man of the man of the man before you get an interview. Nothing's organic anymore.
Wow, he just broke that down. But you mentioned something very important. You talked a little bit about Jay-Z and being held accountable. You talked about, earlier, Barrington mentioned Barack Obama and how Belafonte was holding him accountable. Talk about that, Barrington. That's important, that he will hold his own accountable as well as others.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I see Harry Belafonte and I see the way that he rolled, it reminds me so much of family members and other people that I knew who were either born and or raised in Jamaica. There is a level of resistance that is like rooted in Black people, and I think it's no accident that he talks about the fact that most of his family were farmers.
Mm-hmm.
Most of my family in the early days were on the land. As things changed, they moved to the cities and all that stuff. But I think that one of the things that is so important is that if you don't care about being punished, being marginalized, you do like him. He stood alone.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's critical for us to always hold those who claim to be our leaders. There are some folks that call them the misleadership class. We have to hold the misleadership class accountable, and we don't, because folks were so enamored with the idea that Barack Obama was elected president that they never held him accountable.
Mm-hmm.
And when he came in, he made it clear that he was not a radical, that he was not about making those types of changes, and that he was the president for all Americans. And I talked to folks who were like, give him a chance, wait till the second term. We're still waiting. And I guarantee you that if we had a president, Harry Belafonte, it would have been a whole different vibe, a whole different direction.
Well, let's take a look at this clip.
Describes a success or fulfillment of the issues and the grievances that face the Negro people. The now is a statement that from here on in there's a point of no return. That there is success or there is utter failure. There is no middle of the line. There is no compromise on the issue. The now that is being spoken about is the fact that in 100 years, finally, through whatever the causes have been in history, and most of them have been because of oppression, the Negro people have strongly and fully taken the bit in their teeth. They're asking absolutely no quarter from anyone. Even the hand that is extended in terms of brotherhood and friendship to the white citizens who want to participate, it is for them to make the choice to accept, because they intend to move without it. And that, and I don't mean to say that the Black community is not a community that does not have responsibility in this current revolution. But I do say that the bulk of the interpretation of whether this thing is going to end successfully and joyously or is going to end disastrously lays very heavily with the white community. It lays very heavily with the profiteers. It lays very heavily with the vested interests. It lays very heavily with a great middle stream in this country of people who have refused to commit themselves or even have the slightest knowledge that these things have been going on. And those who have decried demonstrations and who have said the Negro is going too far, they are the ones who in fact are being provoked the most by this, because for the first time, and it is only throughout demonstrations, that they have come to a level of consciousness. And in this now that we speak of, it is this point of no return, because we are on the march, and there is going to be no return from it, because the march in Washington today is one thing, but it doesn't end there. There are going to be marches again, and there are going to be marches in the local villages and in the local cities, and in the it's not just in the South, it's in the North, it's all over.
You know, take it from there, Barrington.
You know what strikes me? Every time I see those pictures of the March on Washington and I see Charlton Heston, I have to shake my head to think about where he was and where he ended up during the Reagan era.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, for all of this past his prologue, because he said that in 1963, and in 2023, we are still in the position of pursuing freedom at a time when resistance from vested interests, from political parties, from corporations is at its height. We are witnessing an attempt by what used to be the Republican Party and a whole host of other people who are using the Republican Party as cover to pull and drag this country back to segregationist, slavery type days, the days when the black codes determined that, you know, if you see a white person walking on the street, you got to step off the sidewalk. That if you looked at a white person, you could be lynched for reckless eyeballing. You know, I see these videos, and it's like these white people, not all white people, certain people have lost their goddamn minds, because they want to tell you, they want to police where you walk. They want to police what you do. They're going after our children. I remember the 8-year-old black child that was selling lemonade, and some idiot woman came to her and said, "Where's your permit to sell?" I mean, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous.
David Youngblood says what struck me in that clip was the person of the white lips. The, rea- the reaction there was really telling, wasn't it? Some of the tributes, right? Barack Obama, former President Barack Obama, says Harry Belafonte was a barrier-breaking legend who used his platform to lift others. He lived a good life, transforming the arts while also standing up for civil rights, and he did it all with his signature smile and style. Sesame Street put out a statement on the death of Harry Belafonte. They say, today we honor and remember the life of our friend. Take a moment with us to reflect and honor his legacy and enjoy his classic appearances on Sesame Street. Nina Turner, of course, we've had Nina on the show before. She mentions his quote about being an activist over an artist. Colin Kaepernick says, "Thank you, Mr. B, for all of your years of mentorship, guidance, and lifetime of activism, fighting for a better future for all of us. You will be missed by many, but your memory and impact live on." Attorney Benjamin Crump, says that Harry Belafonte was a tireless activist, EGOT winner, and successful singer. Through his extraordinary contributions, including his notable advocacy for human rights and social justice, he leaves an indelible mark on this world. And finally, Martin Luther King III says, after Dad was assassinated, Harry Belafonte joined me, Mom, and my siblings in Memphis. He was one of the only people to make sure that Mom and her children were taken care of in the months, days, and years after the assassination. He was there for us even when others had gone. And certainly don't want to overlook the one tribute from Flavor Flav. He says prayers and strength to the family, family of the iconic and legendary hero Harry Belafonte. So the tributes are pouring in. One of the things that Harry Belafonte did, and that also went barely recognized, he came up with the idea for the recording of the 1985 hit song
We are the
We
world.
Are the World. That included Bob Dylan, Michael Jackson, Bruce Springsteen, and others to raise money for famine relief in Africa. Um, there was just almost nothing, Sam, on a global scale in which in which there was a need that Harry Belafonte didn't have his hands in.
And once again, that goes to the whole internationalist spirit that he had, and you can say he took from his mentor Paul Robeson. And in terms of that song, that was a very powerful song, by the way, and it goes to show you how we merge activism and the arts, and how the arts can be a vehicle to really articulate the issues of the day. And we do need to see more of that. I would like to see that spirit being embodied, with Harry Belafonte not being here in the present. I think in the coming days and weeks, we can further examine his legacy and learn more and more about him. But, what he did ran the gamut, and his 96 years were not wasted at all.
No, he drew criticism. We talked a little bit about these things, but I'll mention them anyway. He drew criticism, calling President George W. Bush the greatest terrorist in the world for leading an invasion of Iraq. And he assailed Black celebrities such as Jay-Z and Beyonce for not taking bolder stands on social justice. He criticized President Obama so much during actually, this is why while Obama was senator, the criticism began there, so much so that during the then senator's first presidential run in 2008, that Obama asked him, "When are you going to cut me some slack?" And then Harry Belafonte responded to Obama's question by saying, "What makes you think that's not what I've been doing?"
Oh, wow.
He
Yeah.
was born Harold George Belafonte Jr. in New York City on March the 1st, 1927. Poor Caribbean immigrants. His father worked as a cook on merchant ships and abandoned the family when Harry Belafonte was young. He spent some of his boyhood in Jamaica, the former British colony, and his mother's native country, where he witnessed white English authorities mistreating Black Jamaicans. He returned to New York's Harlem by 1940 to live with his mother, who struggled to hold her family together amid grinding poverty. He said about his mother, she was the one who taught him that you shouldn't let the sun go down without fighting against injustice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pretty amazing, right?
Hey, she planted the seeds early. And, the impact of us as parents sometimes is often immeasurable. And so I'm grateful to his mother. I'm grateful to his parents. I'm grateful for all what they instilled in him. And to me he's just like a generator. He got these values and these characteristics put in him, and he just amplified it and exploded. It exploded in ways that are beneficial to us in ways that we'll only figure out later on.
Sam, here's the thing. You always hear, and it's so true, you are who you surround yourself with. Belafonte had to drop out of school. However, he met college-educated Black men who gave him a wider exposure to the world, talking to him about big issues such as segregation and colonialism. And he said the experience of fighting against fascism abroad while coming back to segregation at home angered him, much like many other Black veterans from World War II. So he kind of surrounded himself with educated Black men, or not kind of, he did. And he learned a lot from them.
They say life is the best teacher. And, having so many experiences, it really broadened his, Harry Belafonte's consciousness. And it just goes to show you that literacy is very important. I'm being kind of tangential again, but at the very same time, it's very important that no matter who you are, and this especially goes out to the entertainers, not that I hold them in high regard, but having Harry Belafonte's legacy is kind of hard not to, because here we have a well-read person, a person who, despite his level of education, was able to rub shoulders with college-educated people and talk about issues, and a person who was able to tie his individual experiences to the collective experiences of the world, we have a person who was able to analyze the world and use that analysis to change the world. So it just goes to show that, knowledge is power, and knowledge is the foundation, through which you are able to see the world and you are able to act on what you are, and at a time when we're talking about STEM this, STEM that, and people in the United States, they want to, be YouTube stars instead of learning, it just goes to show you that there are many intangibles that we are losing as a people when we don't take the time to crack open up a book and read, when we don't pass down knowledge from elder to elder, from contemporary to contemporary, because all of that is the basis on which you make your actions. And we have a lot of people, mind you, there are more people than there are not who are making good moves, but those who are not making good moves are often held up in high regard, and they are the ones who are being followed for their ignorance and for for their statements that show a lack of regard for people and a lack of knowledge about history and culture. And Harry Belafonte was not like that at all.
And it's so interesting because one of my old friends, I call him my big brother, Sheik, who's an actor, always says, you either find a way or make a way. Well, Harry Belafonte was working as a janitor in New York when he attended a play at the American Negro Theater, and he was so swept up by the performance that he witnessed that he decided to become an actor, and he eventually studied acting at a workshop attended by, guess who his classmates were? Marlon Brando, Tony Curtis, and B. Arthur. So it's, again, you surround yourself by certain individuals, and you learn from them, right?
But Stacy, I think one key ingredient of all of that is self-awareness.
Yes.
And an acknowledgement that you need the information, the knowledge, the lived experiences of these people that are around you. Because I talk to people every day, these misleaders who never listen to another point of view, who are not open to different points of view. And in a lot of cases, they may have gotten a degree at some point and then they close their brain down. So you have to be of the mindset that you're constantly growing, that you constantly are looking for people, expose yourself to people that are going to help you to grow. I think one of the things that I've been thinking about as well, every time that I go to Jamaica, I usually end up in the bush somewhere. And I would sit and talk to folks whose shadow never graced a school, who in a lot of cases may not have been able to read, but they are the most intelligent people that you would ever encounter, because they would have their radio, their transistor radio or a radio, listening to news, and they could hold themselves against Winston Churchill or against Barack Obama or Bill Clinton, anybody who people hold up as being the paragons of educational virtue.
Right.
So a lot of it is, you saw with Harry Belafonte, being driven for excellence, being driven to succeed, and just being relentless in their push to open up, to push against all the barriers that are constantly pressed against Black people.
Yeah, and it may have been mentioned earlier, Barrington, he called Paul Robeson his moral compass. He says for him, Robeson was the sparrow. He was an artist who made those of us in the arts understand the depth of that calling. When he said artists are the gatekeepers of truth, we are civilization's radical voice, is what he learned from Paul Robeson. Real interesting when you see the connections and you get to understand even more the man that is and was Harry Belafonte. I remember his role. He played the serious role. He played the serious comedic role. I remember his role as Geechee Dan Buford in Uptown Saturday Night. One of my favorites of the 70s. It was black exploitation time in the 70s, but those roles that he chose really, it was always a point he was making, Sam, and no matter what he did.
Sorry, I was on mute. And, to that point, what I'll say is that there was always a point to be made, and his catalog was very deep. And I think that, tonight and throughout the weekend, what I need to do is watch more of it. I'm very familiar with Carmen Jones. That's probably the one that I'm most familiar with. And, now that I'm thinking about it,
Yeah.
Now that I'm thinking about it, I can see he played that very well, given his military background. I thought he played that very well, and it just shows his versatility, as an actor and as a musician, especially.
Yeah.
And now that I'm thinking about it, given his background in calypso, being young, a lot of the songs that you hear when you learn about people when they pass away, it's like, okay, that's who that was, and it just makes it even it makes it even realer. So I'm always of the belief that death is an opportunity to learn more about people, and it goes to show you that even though they're not here in the physical, that they will always be here, because given everything that they've done, their footprint is everywhere. Their cultural footprint, their activist footprint, just the way that they mean to the world.
Yeah. And Barrington, Sam mentioned calypso, and we all know that everybody knows the so-called Deo song, the Banana Boat song. How did that resonate in Jamaica? We know the impact it had on the pop culture, but in Jamaica in particular, how did that resonate?
Well, I can't speak for how it resonated in Jamaica, but from my perspective and the perspective of my family and people that I knew, the song encompassed the struggles that we had under the colonial boot, because we would producing bananas was a big deal. It was one of the major exports for Jamaica for a long time. Banana, sugar, maybe some other things, but that was bauxite, but that was major. So it resonated for us. And I'll tell you, when my father was a young man in his 20s, he was making 1 shilling a day as a laborer. And I don't know what the equivalent of a shilling is, but it's not much. I know it was less than $1. Mm-hmm. And most Jamaicans were doing backbreaking work, are still doing backbreaking work, and getting only a fraction of the money that they need to have a decent living. So the idea of getting up in the morning, because slavery supposedly ended, but our families were still enslaved in terms of not getting the wages and the salaries that they needed. They were always exploited. And that's one of the reasons why my family and a lot of Jamaican families were essentially nomads. My father came to the United States in 1944 and was a farm laborer until 1950. And he and my mom went to England in search of a better life in 1950 and 1951. So that resonated with us, not just in Jamaica, in the Caribbean, in Latin America, anywhere where you have had the colonial imperialist stamp. That's always been an issue, and it's one that resonates. It's funny because they said that the album that Deo came from was the first one to go platinum in music history.
Yeah.
1 million copies sold.
But,
superstar, almost before the term became used. I mean, you were one of the first real international superstars. How much of a challenge was that for you to deal with? I mean, you did not, certainly as a child, you weren't a superstar. You grew up poor, right? What were the challenges? of all of a sudden realizing that you couldn't step foot on a street or out of a room in the world without people saying it's Harry Belafonte? How did you deal with that?
I think simply, first of all, I knew that I had to confront it, because I think anybody who is that disenfranchised or deprived spends most of their life trying to overcome the deprivation and trying to overcome the disenfranchisement. I had no problem with being thrust into the world of stardom because I never thought about it. I never, nowhere in my boyhood dreams was there the idea that one day I would be in Hollywood, one day I would be on Broadway, or one day I would be making an album that would be successful. I was quite content, as most blacks were in that period, to just practice my art form, and hopefully I'd find a constituency somewhere in the world, because the larger dream eluded all of us. As a matter of fact, I think in many ways young black people today perhaps have much more of a handle, because they do have Sidney Poitier, they do have Bill Cosby, they do have Richard Pryor, they do have Diana Ross, they do have a lot of, well, Harry Belafonte, they have role models to whom they can look, and somewhere they see this hope. In my youth, there were no such symbols. Sports was not integrated. As a matter of fact, it wasn't until I was in my early 20s that Jackie Robinson was the first black player. Right. So it wasn't until my era that America began to strain at its parameters to permit blacks to begin to fulfill certain roles that we're now filling, that give young people, I think, a sense of what's available to them. Unlike myself, the stardom and the public response was a coincidence to something else. I've always been opposed to injustice, having been a victim of it. I've always been for women's rights, primarily because I saw what happened to my mother as a domestic and what happened to her as a woman. I've always been for people coming together, because I think a world not integrated is a world disintegrated with war and pain and stuff. So my role was fairly easy in terms of public acclaim. I just never set out for it. The public came to me. They made me theirs. What devastated me was the fact that it became international. I hadn't quite ever, certainly not, I didn't see it in America, let alone in Japan, France, Italy.
As outspoken as you have been over the years in saying what you believe, in other words, being, quote, political, expressing your views in public, and some performers have gotten in trouble doing that. Their careers have gotten in trouble. Yours didn't. How do you account for the fact that you have always come right out and said what you believed and wanted to say, and it hasn't had any adverse effect on your career at all?
I don't know that I really have all the answers. All I know is that unto thine own self be true. March to a drum beat that you believe in. And I think I share the company of that kind of philosophy with people like Alan Alda, who has been on earlier, Jane Fonda, Henry Fonda, Marlon Brando. I just think that the world at large is more embracing when you bring a truth, when you bring a sense of the glory and the celebration of mankind, than if you abstain. I'm sure there's some people who wouldn't hire me because of my political or social beliefs. But when I measure what my commitment must be to mankind, I don't think there's any question. There's no choice between freedom and employment.
We got a couple minutes left. Go ahead, Barrington. That was as powerful as they get.
Hey, I always laugh because I get folks all the time saying, "Oh my God, aren't you afraid that you're gonna get fired?" And I'm like, "Yo, I counted all the jobs that I've had since I came to the United States at 19 years old, and it's 56 plus." Right? Because anytime someone says, "Get out of whatever," I'm gonna find a job because I gotta eat. And so once you, like he said, once you're committed to the path that you're on, the universe and the ancestors are gonna take care of you.
Yeah. Well,
I'm grateful that they didn't kill him, because he was doing and saying things that could have ended up him being assassinated. So God is good.
David Youngblood said he's had over 30 jobs. We got one more clip, Sam, and then we'll throw it to you.
Eleanor Roosevelt was a close friend. And once sitting in Hyde Park with her, she told a story about a great black leader by the name of A. Philip Randolph. He was one of the great giants of the century, certainly one of the great thinkers. And she recalled an evening when A. Philip Randolph had been invited to a dinner at the White House. And just he and her and the President, Franklin Roosevelt. And during the course of the dinner, the President invited Mr. Randolph to speak his thoughts. And for a long time, A. Philip Randolph held forth on every list of grievances he could think of for the people in the labor movement, for the people who were poor, for black people, and Roosevelt permitted him to hold forth without any interruption until he concluded. At the end of it, Roosevelt reached for a box of cigars, passed one around to Philip, and as he slowly lit the cigar, he turned to Philip Randolph and he said, "Philip, let me tell you, I've heard everything you've said. I've missed absolutely nothing. And there's nothing that you've said that I disagree with. And I do, in fact, have the platform to be able to make the transformation work that you're looking for. And I guess we're all looking for. I have just one request of you, and it is for you to go out and make me do it." It seems to me that there will be no loftier statements and no greater speeches to be made than have already been made. Certainly Abraham Lincoln, Frederick Douglass, Fannie Lou Hamer down in Atlantic City when she challenged with the Freedom Mississippi Democratic Party. There are a lot of people who've made speeches that are as eloquent as will ever be written. And we've listened to a lot of redundancy. A lot of people who've carefully selected the phrases and applied them to the moment. What eludes us is the bankruptcy of the action itself. This poverty that our country is witnessing has never gone away. Most of the politicians I know of have visited these places of poverty. They make it their business when they're running for the highest office in this nation to go into the heart of our pain, our anguish, our indignities, and make promises only to walk into the places of power and then deny us. I guess part of the reason I'm here is to really look through the ravages of the Democratic Party and see if anything is really worth salvaging. Because when Dr. King said, "We're integrated into a burning house," we said to him, "What do we do about it?" He said, "We're just going to have to go out and become firemen." Well, maybe that's what my humble task is, to find the truck, get the hose, and know where to turn it on.
Sam, real quick, your reaction.
What was the date on that? Because I feel like Barack Obama was like the Democratic Party's saving grace as it relates to black people. And in my criticism of Obama, I tell people I never turn toward Obama because I expect Obama to do what he does. I turn toward supporters and people who are the middlemen, people who are in the room working us in order to get to him. And what we need is a total grassroots strategy, local level, state level on up, to create something of our own. It has to be done. No more overtures, no more talking, just straight action. And I think Mr. Belafonte was on it at that moment. And it's very creepy how that much of what he said still stands to this day. So something's got to get done, and we can't stop talking about it.
Absolutely. And before we close, just this note on Harry Belafonte. In 2016, a group of black students approached him in Harlem and asked if there was anything he was still looking for despite his advanced age. And this is his response: "What I've always been looking for, where resides the rebel heart. Without the rebellious heart, without people who understand that there's no sacrifice we can make that is too great to retrieve that which we've lost. We will forever be distracted with possessions and trinkets and title." Harry Belafonte. We remember Harry Belafonte, who died yesterday at the age of 96. Great insight, Barrington Salmon, Sam P.K. Collins. Really appreciate you both. Really appreciate you all for watching Let It Be Known. We will see you again tomorrow.